We're here by the shores of Lough Neagh, the biggest inland lake in UK and Northern Ireland. Apparently, it's really important for wildlife.
It's a special protection area designated under the Wild Birds Directive.
Of the European Union.
Of the European Union, yes. And in the 1990s, it hosted diving duck populations of around or over 100,000. But up until 2004, 2005, they declined by upwards of 80%. And in fact, the RSPB have now suggested that it may have even declined by more. And in fact, we may be looking at populations of under 10,000. So in less than 2 decades, we've had a decline of around 90% of the diving duck population here.
What's causing that?
Well, we don't actually know what's causing it. A doctorate that was carried out recently by a student in Queen's University suggested that there was a correlation between the decline in the diving ducks and their food source. But there are also many other things happening on the loch. For instance, the impact of the eutrophication. It is a highly eutrophic lake. Plus, we also then have the unregulated sand extraction, which has taken place on a regionally significant and colossal scale.
Well, yeah, so we've just noticed a big red barge kind of thing come in from so far away on the lake and dock right behind us here where this big pile of sand is. Is that something to do with that? What's going on there then?
That's the unregulated sand extraction taking place. And what we've got to remember here is that this requires planning permission. It requires assessment under the environmental impact assessment regulations.
Again, and more European Union legislation.
That's the EIA directive. And it also requires assessment under the Habitats Directive in terms of habitats regulation assessment. But very recently the Minister has confirmed, only last year in fact, confirmed that it neither has planning permission nor has EIA or habitats regulation assessments ever been carried out in this.
And how much gravel are they taking from here, do we know?
Well, again, there are a number of studies that estimate between 1.2 and the latest study, which was carried out again by the Assembly, 1.7 million tonnes per year.
And this is a very shallow lake, I understand, sort of glacial lake. It's not...
So
what is that doing to the ecosystem of the lake, do you think?
Well, but because there's been no studies done, we can't actually say what damage is being caused. But importantly, underpinning all of the European directives is the precautionary principle, which the department are required to abide by. But what we can say for definite here is that for quite some number of years, and certainly since the designation of the loch as an ASSI, an Area of Special Scientific Interest, in 1992, and subsequently a Special Protection Area in 1998, the department has turned a blind eye to the unauthorised activity that's been taking place here.
Obviously around the shores of the lake there's some very obvious extraction and stockpiling going on. So whoever is in charge of regulating this, they've got all the evidence they want, haven't they? If they wanted to do something?
Absolutely. It's any day that you arrive on this lake, you will see from various points the sand barges extracting sand. So therefore, if the department wanted the evidence, they could certainly come and gather it at any time.
The companies have been accelerating their extraction in the meantime. And what can you tell us about that?
Had this not been raised in the Northern Ireland Assembly over a year ago, the department would not have bothered doing anything. They would have continued to turn a blind eye, but because the specific issue of sand extraction was raised in the Northern Ireland Assembly, the department were obliged to open an enforcement case, and that was in March 2014. Since then, they have issued a warning to the operators in September and October to cease works. But after
they should stop it.
They should stop it.
Which they're clearly not. We've just seen a barge coming in full of sand.
Well, in fact, what we're hearing anecdotally is the fact that the activities certainly have escalated since being served with the warning letter. In terms of the precautionary principle, the slightest possibility of harm being caused should effectively allow the department to step in and take action.
I also understand this has historically been a really important area for eel fisheries.
But this is the largest wild eel fishery in Europe, and as I understand, the eel populations are in dramatic decline all around
as
the world.
Well.
Absolutely. And the eels are in such decline that they're protected by their own legislation, own European legislation. And that in itself should also be a warning to the department in terms of having to act in line with the precautionary principle.
So it would be really interesting to know whether the sand extraction is making any difference to the decline also in eel populations. Is there any evidence of that?
Well, again, because the department rely on the fact that there is no evidence, because they haven't carried out any studies. But again, we've got to revert back to what the European legislation says in regard to the application of the precautionary principle. And if there is the merest doubt that it could be causing that decline, then the department should be acting proactively. Now,
I mean, this is laughable, isn't it? I mean, this is meant to be one of the richest countries in the world with one of the best environmental regulation. We're part of the European Union, also with strict environmental laws, which it boasts about. What on earth is going on that this can happen?
In 2004, Northern Ireland was described as the dirty corner of the UK by the UKLA, the United Kingdom Environmental Law Association. And my studies since then have indicated the fact that since 2014 it's actually got worse. And bearing in mind as well is that we're talking about the protected bird populations here and the eels, but there are many other protected species in here. There's the Atlantic salmon, protected under the Habitats Directive, and there's the lamprey. Lough Neagh is identified as a stronghold for the lamprey. And in the areas where the sand's extracted from, is the habitat for these lampreys, for the juvenile habitats for the eels, yet there is no control whatsoever in regard to what happens here in terms of extraction.